So regardless of what platform they're on.
Yeah. Now, there are differences in speeds, of course. Yeah. Wireless and satellite can't go as fast as fibre. Okay.
And will the commitment to the uniform price impact on the viability of the NBN?
It's as we understand it, something the government would like to achieve, and so we have factored that into our overall business model.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Birmingham.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was expecting Senator Ludlam. Happy days.
Yeah, it jumped
Excellent.
ship.
All good. I'd like to turn to the implementation study to start with, please. Now, the $25 million McKinsey KPMG implementation study was commissioned by the department. Does it still accurately reflect and represent the department's preferred approach to implementing the government's broadband policy?
It never represented the department's preferred approach. It's McKinsey's advice.
Okay. So what is the government's response, or NBN Co's response, to the implementation study? Is it purely an input to the work, and you will choose to accept, reject, trash, otherwise recommendations as either the government or the NBN Co sees fit?
It's a bit of a broad question. Just want to break it up a bit.
Well, how do you treat the implementation study? Just as a piece of advice, as a piece of input?
That's what it was.
Yeah, not just as a piece of input. I think the great value in the implementation study is it put a substantial amount of substance in the public arena that was previously missing. So I think it sells the implementation study short to say it was just an input. I know from providing this, I was overseas in North America in the last 2 weeks. The implementation study provides a lot of analysis for people over there who are interested in the nature of the investment the Australian government is making. It also contributes to consideration by...
Thank you.
Sorry. No, I haven't finished yet, Senator.
Okay. Thanks, Mr.
We were just waiting so you could hear.
It also contributes to consideration by regulatory authorities. So a number of parties, for example the ACCC, so a number of parties will take from the implementation study the advice that's been provided, consider it as a contribution across theirs. You mentioned the NBN Co. Obviously there's issues in there the NBN Co. wish to consider and come to conclusions on and provide advice to the government. It's true of the department, it's true of the regulatory authorities, it's true of the market generally, and as I said, overseas people take a great deal of interest in the fact that this study is a piece of work from McKinsey with substantial analysis behind it.
Okay. McKinsey's study made 84 recommendations. How many of those have the relevant agencies and or NBN Co considered as they apply to each of them, and which have been accepted or rejected to date? More particularly, we'll start with which have been rejected to date.
The policy positions announced by the government, for example, the most substantive being that we should move from a 90% fibre coverage to a 93% fibre coverage. There's a series of smaller recommendations which are related to that, which the government considered before it made that 93% commitment, and consequent on making the 93% commitment are effectively endorsed. The receipt of the business plan from NBN Co will enable the government to consider further a series of the implementation study recommendations and make some final decisions on those, because obviously there'll have to be consistency between the policy position as recommended in the implementation study and the business case as recommended by the NBN Co board. As the Minister earlier indicated, the timeframe for that is coming upon us, so you can expect that the remaining recommendations will be dealt with in that context.
Okay. What, and perhaps this is best for Mr Quigley, what would you describe as the most important differences between the recommendations from the implementation study and the actual strategy that NBN Co is?
That's advice that Mr Quigley would give to the government, and I'm not sure he's in a position that he can give you any information until after the government have considered his advice.
Well, Minister, I think Mr Quigley's already been making some decisions, some of which are public in this regard and some of which are not and will be part of the business case, which I acknowledge you've already said will not be.
The government makes decisions about the recommendations based on advice from both NBN Co, Mr Quigley, the department, the ACCC and a range of other factors. So government makes decisions about the recommendations.
Has
not
the
Mr.
government
Quigley.
decided to reject any of the recommendations out of the McKinsey report already, as they would relate specifically to the build and to the operations of the NBN code?
Yeah, I think the one that we've indicated publicly so far is the decision for NBN Co to undertake the wireless build. I think that's the only one we've given a public indication on at this stage. We've indicated we accept the 1993. I'm just trying to think if there's any others.
There's some, as I said earlier, there's some that are consequent upon that that are
Yeah.
effectively endorsed by going to 93%.
Yeah, so there's some knock-on ones from that, but the government hasn't finalised all its consideration of all of the recommendations yet. But on a couple of key ones, we've made some decisions, rejected one, accepted some, which we've indicated publicly.
And the government will be proposing over the period of time, as all the recommendations are considered, to indicate publicly.
Yeah, no, we intend
its
to make a formal
response to
response.
all of them and make a formal
We intend to
response.
make a formal
through-
response.
that will be tabled or released in some form,
Yes.
shape or form. Good. Has the government considered recommendations 76, 77, 80 and 82 of the study?
The government's considering all of the recommendations of the study.
Has the government made a decision
The
in
government's
response
considering,
to...
and when we've made a final decision, we'll release them publicly.
So the government has not made a final decision in relation to recommendations 76, 77, 80 or 82, which go to the network eventually being separated into passive and active elements?
No, we haven't made we haven't made final decisions on some of those yet.
This relates to how the government
I'm not
previously
going to indicate what decisions we've made yet. There'll be a package response, and we'll put out a package response.
Well, this relates in some ways to how the government has previously described its own policy, and so I'm curious
We'll
as
make
to...
a final statement when we release our response to the recommendations.
So
But I'm not
now,
going to piecemeal play tag with
so
you
now
about,
there's...
you can name 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and ask if I rejected or accepted individual recommendations. You'll just have to eagerly await the release of our final response.
So now the government basically is saying we'll get policy around the NBN by drip feed of acceptance or rejection of the implementation study recommendations.
If we feel the need to announce a decision earlier on individual points, then as we have done, we will. Otherwise, the remainder will be part of a package that we release at a date in the future.
The study models an eventual take-up for the NBN of between 70 and 90% of households. Is this still the expectation for the government?
Well, it depends whether you're asking my opinion of the analysis of McKinsey's. I think it's a very fair and conservative analysis. But I'm referring specifically to the McKinsey's analysis. I'm not making an assertion about what the take-up rate that NBN Co think that they're going to get. So I'm making very clear that there's two very separate discussions.
Okay. And does the government have any objective of its own as part of this policy, or is it...
We will, as I've said, ultimately, particularly following the heads of agreement with Telstra, ultimately have the overwhelming, if not monopoly, supply of the wholesale network within the fibre footprint unless people decide they don't want a fixed line. Mm-hmm. So people can opt to say, no, look, we don't want, when the copper's taken away, we don't want you to put in a piece of fibre. People will be able to make that choice. They can go purely mobile now, or fixed wireless. If you'd like to know the difference, I'll happily give you a rundown on it. And then you can pass it on to Tony and Malcolm and Joe Hockey. You were building a fixed wireless network, not a mobile network.
Thank
Thank
you, Minister. Let's
so
stick
the government.
to you.
Oh no, I appreciate you don't want to stick
you
to.
happily formed.
I appreciate you don't want to mention your policy.
Regrettably, you formed a government, so let's actually talk about the policies that you get the opportunity to implement.
You actually couldn't implement your policy, but I appreciate that you've now dumped it. So it's back to your substance of your question. We would anticipate being a virtual wholesale monopoly, so that our fibre would be the
So in the
connection.
in the absence of any other option, you would anticipate that connection rates or take-up rates of between 70 and 90%.
Well, if we're the only supplier, I would anticipate it'd be 100%. If we've got a wholesale monopoly, we'd be 100%. Other than those, this is within the 93% footprint, other than those that decided they didn't want a fixed line. So of the fixed lines connecting to homes, I would anticipate, as I've said consistently for many months, that we would have the monopoly.
Okay. And obviously we can dig down below that to, which of course the business case will do, I'm sure, as to just what type of connection we're actually talking about there, which will impact greatly on...
I'm confused about what you mean by which type of connection.
Well,
it's a piece of
or
fibre and it attaches to a house.
So does that mean that everybody faces the same fixed costs for connection?
Well, I think what is being speculated on and discussed and debated, Mr Quigley might want to add something, is that it's free if you choose to take it as it's rolling down your street. If you decide not to and then someone else or yourself decides to take it up in the future, there may be a charge. I think that's been the form of words.
It is, that's a possibility. It's not
So-
finalised yet.
$300 for the last estimates.
Sorry?
You told us $300.
We're talking once again, I think we're talking there about Tasmania. Senator, the pre-release trial in Tasmania.
Everything runs on Tasmania. The
No, it
whole
doesn't.
election campaign was run on what happened in Tassie. And in Tassie they were charging $300 and you were charging nothing, Mr Quigley. You were giving it away. No wonder they can do it so cheaply in Tasmania, because your $43 billion investment wasn't getting a cent return.
Oh dear.
Isn't that right?
No.
Tell me I'm wrong.
You're wrong. You couldn't be
So-
more wrong if you were paid to be
Well,
wrong.
Minister, I have an answer to a question
Senator
on notice
McDonald,
received just yesterday.
Senator McDonald, no one is going to answer your question. Senator McDonald, you will get the call if you seek the call.
So-
But Senator Birmingham's got the
I
call.
think
at the
Senator
moment.
Birmingham's in full flight.
Senator Birmingham.
Truth in your answers.
Senator Birmingham.
So, Minister, just refresh my memory to save me looking up the ABS website. What's the current rate of broadband connectivity in Australian households or premises?
Sorry, what's the...
What's the current take-up rate of broadband connectivity for Australian households or premises?
Fixed line.
Roughly.
Fixed line, 60%.
Fixed line,
66.
It's above 60.
It's above 60. Between
Fixed
60 and
line.
66. Fixed line.
60-something%. Okay, thank you. Of course, the take-up rate for fixed-line phone services into households?
Well, it's mandatory.
Well,
It's a universal service obligation. You've got to have a connect fixed line. Now,
that's
people
right.
are going new.
People
are
can
going new, like new DSL, for instance. So some people are not using it, but they're not disconnecting it. But when you build a house, it's mandatory. Yeah, it's mandatory to be a line.
So there's somewhere between 30
Telstra,
and... Anyway.
there's an argument about the way what Telstra are doing right at this moment, but apart from that, there's been...
Regardless, there's somewhere between 30 and 40% of households and premises that have fixed-line phone services without fixed-line broadband services at present.
Yes, that would...
That's right.
The maths suggests
And
that would be
that's
the...
right. Yeah, roughly is fine for the point that I'm seeking to make. You've just said before that because you're building a wholesale monopoly where once the copper's taken away, people have got a piece of fibre running to the house, and that's it, you would expect to basically have universal coverage in the 93%.
It is tragic that Mr Turnbull continues to not understand anything about his portfolio area because, again, he was quoted today in a press release as saying he's very disturbed to hear people are going to lose their phone connection. This is completely false.
Right. So when I
And
talked
it is
about
just
what type
embarrassing.
of... So, Minister, when I
So
said
repeat,
before what type
that's
of
why
connection...
I asked you to clarify
Yes.
what you were asking, because
So-
I was looking forward to explaining to you
So please...
how Mr Turnbull continues to not understand
let's ignore
basics.
Mr Turnbull because I'm asking the question and you don't need to be condescending. Just
I'm looking
give
forward
the
to
answer.
explaining it to him.
Well, you can explain it to me right now.
No, I'm looking forward to you explaining it to him, but please,
Sure.
go on.
Please, Minister, now I'm eager to find out as to when we switch off and pull away the copper network and the cable runs up to all the homes and you're expecting everyone to, of course, because they've only got one fixed line option available to them, to be switching onto this network for the 30 to 40% of Australian households today, and whether that's more or less in the future, who only have a fixed line phone
Would you like an
service.
explanation of how you connect a fixed line phone to a piece of fibre? Because Mr Quigley is looking forward to explaining it to you.
So there will be different types of connections then, Minister.
Well, I asked you...
You mocked me when I posed
I
that
asked you to
before.
clarify so that we could explain to you very simply that just because you have a piece of fibre replacing the piece of copper doesn't mean you lose your fixed line phone. You can choose not to take a fixed line. That will be the case. But as Mr Quigley will explain to you in a moment, the technology involved on how you continue to have a fixed line phone with a piece of fibre. Mr Quigley.
Oh, specifically, you can choose, will you be able to choose to have a fixed line phone without taking out a broadband package?
Yes.
Yes.
We've said that. We've never said anything different. You've just got to stop
you.
believing everything you read in
No.
The Australian. It's engaged in not reporting facts.
Minister,
it's engaged in creating stories. It's
Minister, when you talk
it's
about
prosecuting
near universal,
regime change,
Minister, when
not
you talk about
reporting
near
news.
universal take-up, you're perpetuating a myth that you're expecting all 93% of households who are getting the fibre to be taking up broadband.
No,
That's
I'm not.
what people expect
No,
when
I'm
you
not.
talk about near universal take-up of a national broadband network.
No, I'm not.
So it's not unreasonable for people to
No,
want
I'm
to
not.
clarify
The fact
as to
that,
how
the
it's going
fact
to
that,
work
and I
with phone
excuse,
lines.
I excuse you because I actually do know you understand this, but your shadow communications spokesperson, who needed to take Paul Fletcher along with him to a briefing with Mr Quigley so he could explain to Mr Turnbull what Mr Quigley was talking about later. First time I've ever seen the shadow minister need a shadow minister.
Yeah, fine.
So a shadow minister came to the briefing with Mr Quigley. But just to be very clear to you, the fact that your shadow communications minister doesn't understand how you actually receive a fixed line phone on a piece of fibre is a little disappointing, but Mr Quigley will quickly now explain.
If we can clear it all up, Mr Quigley can give us a factual statement on how NBN Co expects to provide to those people who don't want
I thought Mr
broadband
Turnbull was a tech head.
the fixed
Why
line
did he have to
phone
take Paul
services.
Fletcher with him to the briefing with Mr
Chair.
Quigley?
Chair, I've just asked Mr Quigley.
Mr Quigley, can you answer the question put by Senator Birmingham?
Which is, how do we connect a
How NBN,
A voice connection to a piece of fibre.
I'm not wanting the technical explanation of how technically it is done on the fibre. I accept that it's done.
No, it's
I want to
important you
know
understand-
how NBN Co
It's
is
important you understand how it's
expecting.
done.
This is
It's actually
just
the same
time
answer.
wasting.
I want to know how NBN Co is
Senator Birmingham,
expecting.
we've got a point of order.
The Minister is just completely and utterly wasting time here. Senator Birmingham is trying to ask some sensible questions, and all the Minister wants to do is talk about somebody else, not respond to the questions. And it would be really nice if he would just respond to the questions that Senator Birmingham's asking, instead of talking about somebody else that's not completely irrelevant to the question that Senator Birmingham's asked.
Point of order, but I understand where you're coming from, and
Thank you, Chair.
I'd ask Mr Quigley to respond to the question.
Sorry, can I just make sure I understand what the question was? There's been a few in there.
Thanks, Mr Quigley, and these, I'm sure, are how you love to spend your Tuesday evenings. Mr Quigley, just to be very clear as to how NBN Co expects to manage not at the technical, how people plug their phone in level, but at the commercial arrangement level, the difference for consumers who just want to keep a fixed line phone service.
There will be no difference. For those who just want a fixed line phone, our intention is, in fact our plans, our engineering is such that they just simply unplug from the wall socket, the RJ11 little socket that's in the wall for their analogue phone, they plug it into a little socket that looks exactly the same, and they get a service.
It's magic.
Okay.
It's called telephony. It's magic.
And
they will
the
still
processing is done in the what we call the network terminating unit and back in the soft switches using a protocol called SIP, and it converts it just like a normal analogue telephone.
Very good. And you will sell, or as a wholesale provider, you will sell to your retail providers separate packages for those retail providers to sell phone-only packages.
We expect retail service providers to sell voice-only services if they so choose. And we've had those discussions as part of the financial heads of agreements with Telstra, who's the biggest supplier of, obviously, telephony.
And
today.
announced it months ago.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. It's nice to be able to clear these things up sometimes, and I think we've got a clear
They've
answer from Mr. Quigley.
They've actually been clear all along.
We've got a clear answer from Mr. Quigley that will clear that up for everybody.
Birmingham, don't tempt fate here. Get on with the questions.
Okay, thank you.
So you unplug it from one plug.
The implementation
plug it in
study
another
models, however you want to put it, how the implementation study models an increase in real wholesale access prices over the next 8 years of 1% per annum.
plug. So that's the implementation study you're quoting?
Yes. Is this the government's expectation of the future course of wholesale prices?
That's advice put to us by McKinsey's. It's advice to us. It's a very valuable piece of advice that McKinsey's put to us, which we released fully, and we'll now be getting a business plan from NBN Co, which we'll make public, which will have NBN Co's assumptions.
Prices in the
contained within
telco
it.
sector generally, though, have been falling rather than rising over recent years, have they not?
Well, according to the analysis from many of your friends, prices were apparently going to skyrocket under the NBN, but your general assertion is correct.
Yet your implementation study is based on modelling of price increases over the foreseeable
As I said, that's
future.
a piece of advice to the government, a very valuable, comprehensive piece of advice to the government, but a piece of
$25
advice,
million piece of advice
a very
to the
valuable
government.
piece of advice. I have to say to you, I learnt an enormous amount from that study, an enormous amount. It was very valuable, but that's some advice, very valuable advice, and we'll now receive from NBN Co its business case.
Okay.
Which will include a whole range of assumptions and calculations and detail and information, which will also be made available publicly.
That was the question. I'm happy to let Senator Ludlam have his
Sorry?
go.
So are you interjecting? I'm happy to take it.
Senator Conroy, Senator MacDonald, you'll get the call later. Senator Conroy, Senator
to me yesterday, Minister. You said that.
Senator MacDonald, Senator Ludlam, you have the call.
Do I?
Senator Conroy, Senator Conroy, Senator Ludlam has the call.
This is your answer from yesterday.
Do I need to yell louder? I tend not to do yelling. Mr. Quigley, can I come back to some of the issues that you raised in your opening statement? I've been out of the room for about 15, so if you've covered it, just let me know and I'll check the transcript. You've said that you've issued an RFP for a short-term satellite solution until you put your own up in the air. Can you just tell us a bit about, will that footprint be the entire country, or are you rolling this out incrementally, or what exactly will the short-term solution look like?
No, it would in fact be on a national basis.
Yeah.
We have yet, obviously, when we put out the RFP, depending on those RFP responses, we've yet to finalise those technical details. And, of course, this interim satellite solution is something we have yet to, once we've got all the inputs in, put formally to the government to make decisions on, as we do with everything.
All right.
But it is a satellite service which will be a boost up in capacity and performance from what is available today.
At the moment. If you had your way, how long will we have an interim solution, and how long before NBN Co has its own satellites?
As you probably know, Senator Ludlam, it's launching satellites, and what we're talking about, the plans we have for providing a satellite service to that last 3% of the population is to have 2 large Ka-band satellites. They are big satellites, 80 gigabit per second satellites each, to provide very good services, but they take quite some time to engineer and design, build, launch and get operations, probably around 3 years. So we expect the interim satellite solution to be working for that time.
Okay, for a period of
3
3
years.
3 years. All right, thanks. You also indicated that your current rollout has been a mix of aerial and underground. Can you give us any idea how much of it you're hanging and how much of it's going into trenches?
I can tell you overall, in terms of what our ultimate planning is, we expect around, that's assuming that we consummate the financial heads of agreement we signed with Telstra into a definitive agreement, around 2/3 of what we call local fibre. When we come out from a fibre access node, all of that will be underground because it's larger cable, and we want that to be underground in ducts. When it comes to down the actual street, in some cases there isn't duct available, and that's why we're signing facilities access agreement with utility companies to be able to do some of that aerial.
Is that because you don't intend to do any of your own trenching at that level?
No, we will expect to do our own trenching, and in fact some of the first release sites we are trenching today. So, for example, in Wollonga in South Australia, we are doing almost all of that underground.
Okay. Is the intention to... I think I've asked you this before. What's that?
It's very pleased to hear that.
Indeed. Is it the intention to pull the copper out of the ground as you go? And I know I've asked you about this before. What happens to all this legacy copper that's going to be lying around? That
will be a choice up to Telstra.
It's owned by Telstra. It's up to them what they decide to do with
what they do with it.
Yes. Now, in my understanding of it, if you like, the salvage value is if you're trying to pull single strands, really it's not particularly valuable to do that.
But collectively, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of tonnes of copper underground.
Possibly, and it may also be that we could use the copper as a lead, if you like, to pull the fibre through, especially in conduits that are going to homes.
Okay.
So we may do that. That's one of the migration scenarios and details that we're working through with Telstra.
All right. I've got one or two more specific questions, and I've got a couple of general ones. Looking at the indicative maps for the state-by-state rollout of the backhaul and of the network, and what will be covered by fibre and what will be covered by wireless and satellite infill. I'm going to pick two examples in Western Australia, but I guess they'll be right across the country. There's two strips through Meekatharra, Kew, Mount Magnet. That's one of them, and the other one, Leonora and Laverton, that aren't in the fibre footprint.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I can understand at some point it's just they've fallen off the end of somebody's spreadsheet and you've decided it's not worth it. If local government authorities or businesses or the state government or some other party comes to the table looking to make a contribution to get fibre out there while you're rolling it out, would you look favourably on that? And are there any models that you would prefer or anything on the table at the moment?
Yes, absolutely. We would certainly consider that, and that would be the ideal time, and it's something, one of the reasons we would be publishing the maps and the plans early enough that people can consider whether they would like to have fibre extended beyond what we would otherwise do. As you would understand, Senator, what we did in calculating the 93% was to look at the cost curve and where the lines go between wireless and satellite and fibre, and it comes a point when, as you would understand, fibre gets very expensive per end premise to connect. And so we just try to have that balance of cost. You obviously can't fibre 100% of the country.
No, I recognise that. Has anybody come forward anywhere around the country with the sort of arrangement that I'm proposing?
No, I know we've had some queries about our willingness to do so, which we've responded to positively, but there hasn't been any specific engineering done.
The only one that I'm aware of that made a bit of noise is up at Bruce Scott, Mayor, not Bruce Scott MP, the Mayor of Barcoo, has been talking publicly about they have some money themselves, the council have set aside. They've been talking to the Queensland government about getting a matching contribution, and I know they've talked about approaching NBN once they've finalised that arrangement with the Queensland government about building, if you like, a spur on the back of the network. That's what I'm aware of. I don't know it's formally gone to Mr Quigley. It may have been briefly talked about with some other officers of NBN Co. But I know certainly Mr Scott and the Shire of Barcoo, if it's a Shire, are certainly publicly discussed that. And that's in Western Queensland.
All right. So I won't ask you to
make
any direct commitments on this tonight, obviously, but if you were able to get some sort of contribution to get the backhaul up to a remote mining town, such as the ones that I'm talking about, NBN Co would be interested potentially in doing the fibre, the last mile, if you will.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. So coming back to some more general issues, I can understand that the rollout that's occurred so far has been partly in regional areas, and that you're kind of salt and peppering the first release sites. But there was an agreement by the incoming Prime Minister Gillard with the independents and others about front-loading a regional rollout first. And I'd like to know what that does to your balance sheet and whether and how much of a difference that's made to the work that you're doing at the moment.
Firstly, there's been a lot of misinformation, or rather just laziness on the part of particularly analysts who leapt out claiming this drastically affected the cost. It has no impact on the cost. If you look at, and I think Mr Quigley may or may not have gone through them, if you look at the first 5 mainland release sites, 4 out of those 5 are regional. If you look at Tasmania, that entire build would be defined as regional. If you look at the next 19 sites, of the new 14, bearing in mind 5 of the 19 are extensions of the existing, of the new 14, 8 of the 14 are regional sites. So if you look at the actual build construction of NBN Co, it was never an inward-out build.
Right.
And so almost universally the commentary on this has been deeply flawed. People were too lazy to actually look at where we were actually building. So the impact on Mr Quigley's balance sheet, I think you described it, in terms of cost of build, none.
What about timing? Have you essentially offered the independents no more than was already occurring?
No, what we're saying is that people misunderstood that we were in actual fact already building a mix.
All right. So without going to polemic, and to Mr Quigley, if I can invite you to get a word in edgewise, has it made any material difference to your work at all, the agreement that was made with the new government?
Yes, Senator Conroy is exactly correct in terms of we were rolling out uniformly across the country, as you can see, as we talked about in our volume rollout, even once we get beyond the first and second release sites, uniformly across the country, which means, per se, we're doing more in rural Australia per head of population. You can see that in the detailed plans. In terms of what does it do to our finances, it makes no difference to our finances because we're planning to do a substantial proportion. But what we have done is accelerated the wireless and accelerated our interim satellite solutions. We're moving into a different process to try and accelerate those, to give priority to regional areas. And we have in our latest business plan, which we'll be submitting to the government shortly, as we've spoken about, taken into account the priority in regional area. So as we roll out the transit network and then build what we call fan sites on those, we've taken account of the direction from government to ensure we prioritise regional areas.
All right. Can you tell us what expenditure has been earmarked for the government's public information and education campaign and what kind of form you expect this to take? Yes.
So you're asking me?
Well, there might be 2 questions there. If the government is intending to do something in parallel with what NBN Co is undertaking.
Well, as you know, we had a government information campaign through June and early July. There may still be some funds left over from that, I'm not sure. Mr Harris is shaking his head. At this stage, the government hasn't made any decisions about further information campaigns. Mr Quigley may have news on something I'm genuinely unaware.
Right. As we tend to roll out in sites, we go and have public meetings explaining what's going on. We do letter drops and we generally have education programs. We are bit by bit building up the infrastructure to do more of that because there is a lot of misinformation around the network. It's in various media. We just have to deal with that. But
names.
So what we get out there, and we expect to be doing more of that as we begin to roll out. And we're looking at other things that we can possibly do to be demonstrating to people what this really means in terms of pieces of equipment and seeing how connections will go, and especially explaining to them what are their options as we actually connect the fibre to them.
I would propose that we go a break. Come back on your issues for 5-10 minutes, depending how it is, and then we'll go to Senator Troth, and then Senator Wortley. So we'll break now, suspend to 9:15. Senator Ludlam.
I was.
Senator Ludlam.
But I'm actually going to take a break to ask a question from the Twitterverse.
Sorry, just before you go to Twitterverse, could I just supplement the question you were asking?
The public information stuff.
15 officers around the country.
This is for the education campaign?
No, well, I'll come to their role in it in a moment.
All right.
These are our facilitators, what do we call them?
Oh, yeah, 14.
14 in total.
We have 14 people to do broadband promotion.
Yes.
All right.
So we have 14 officers around the country that have been hired in conjunction with local chambers of commerce, local councils, local regional development associations, and their job is to organise education at the grassroots about the benefits of the National Broadband Network as it's being rolled into their communities.
That's a good answer. Where would I find details of who they are and where they're based?
On the website.
Do you want to just table that for
I
the
don't
committee?
know the answer to that.
No, I don't
know
expect you to have their phone numbers on
we
you
were-
to hand, but can
we
you just
were-
table some...
We were in the process of recruiting them prior to the election, so I know that the recruitment process did finish. I know we did get some people in place.
I met them recently.
Senator Conroy's met them, but we'll have to give you an outline of this, Senator. With the better thing to do to take the rest of this on notice, and we can give you an outline of where it is. Where we're at.
They're
with
based
actual
out in
recruitment.
regional Australia, all around the rollout. No, they're paid for by us, but they're working and they were hired with local input and consultation, and they're locals in the different places that they've been hired. So they were in consultation with the local council, the local regional development association.
But they're department funded, not NBN co-funded.
No, department.
Departmental. And I should clarify, we were seeking them, and as I said, that happened just before the election, so I need to be sure about the actual numbers that we actually got out of that process.
Been hired, yeah.
So we'll be able to put that on notice for you about where they are and if they're not employed, when we intend to employ them, that sort of thing. Because we've got a program to do this.
I don't want to cut across.
No, that's fine. But you will table some info for us when you can, just so that we know who they are and where they are.
No, it's just a question of it's still a work in progress.
When they're up. That's fine.
For completeness of answer, I should say, they will be running local meetings, coordinating with NBN Co at various times for the information, putting on road shows, that type of thing.
That's fine, and I think that's appropriate. So the question that I've been sent, which I wouldn't have thought to ask, from Twitter says, if you have a chance, ask Quigley, it should be Mr Quigley, why they dropped the ADSL2 emulation ports from the ONT plans, please. Thanks. The optical network terminal, I've just reminded myself that's what that means. Do you have an idea what on earth this person, why they would be asking you that?
Yes, I know exactly why they're asking
Great.
the question. It is a concept that, in fact, I raised some time ago with our own engineering folks about possibly adding an ADSL emulation port on the NTU or ONT so that someone who's got a DSL service can unplug the DSL line, plug into our ONT and keep their DSL modem and continue that way. It sounded like a possibility, which is why I asked to explore it. In fact, we put the proposition to some of the vendors to cost it, and we also put the proposition to retail service providers in our deep dive. And what we found is uniformly there was no interest from the retail service providers. They believed they could solve that problem more effectively using residential gateways and hanging on to existing DSL modems. And what we also found was that it was quite an expensive proposition to put that functionality into an optical network termination, and it wasn't being used anywhere else in the world. It would be a special one-off for this application.
Does that mean if you have opted into the service or you've been plugged in one way or another and you have an ADSL2 modem, you won't be able to use that?
The ADSL2 modem itself, you potentially can use, and the reason why I'm a little cautious here is there is a huge variety of different modem types. There's a huge variety of residential gateways. Some residential gateways and DSL modems are combined, so you can't give a definitive answer. What we can say is that for most retail service providers, they're much more comfortable in providing a residential gateway, which is very cheap to do these days. They're very, very cheap devices because there's ongoing improvements in Wi-Fi capability as new standards come out. They want to take that opportunity to come in and put a retail service and put that residential gateway Wi-Fi modem capability in at the same time.
Okay. All right. Thank you for indulging my Q&A moment.
To that.
Of course.
And I
Don't believe you.
Sorry to disappoint you, Minister. So, in the circumstance where you translate a property from copper to fibre, which is the objective, as stated, what happens to the DSL services that are being provided, which is currently being provided on a copper service? Does the service then translate to the NBN, the current broadband service?
Yes, but it's partitioned slightly differently. DSL modem is what's called a layer 3 device. We're splitting that so that we're providing just Ethernet, so the residential gateway is a layer 3 device. So to the end user, they see no difference except it's a much faster broadband service they're getting.
So effectively what you're doing is you're taking out essentially all the DSL service and you're replacing it with an NBN-based service.
Yeah, but at what's called the layer 3 and layer 4, the IP TCP layer, it's identical. So the end devices which use these upper level protocols, IP and TCP, it looks identical to them. It's just the way in which the underlying layers are delivered.
And so that whole process is part of the negotiation that you're currently having with Telstra, because it's a transfer of technology of hardware.
Yes, we're upgrading the ageing copper network now.
Yeah, I understand.
And replacing it with fibre.
I think they're like closing down CDMA and moving to
new version.
I understand exactly what you're saying to me. So I just wanted to clarify that you're effectively transferring everything out of one network as it exists and onto the new technology.
That's right. And there's a variety of different services and different CPE types that are on there.
My questions in detail later. Thank you.
It's really straightforward.
I just want to ask about wireless and a couple of issues that arise from the implementation study. I think the implementation study recommended that the wireless component of the NBN would be built by the private sector, and I think you've made a decision that NBN Co will build that. Can you tell us, first of all, if that's a correct description of what's going on, and whether that'll make a difference in cost to performance or why that call has been made?
Sorry, could you just repeat that question?
All right. The wireless component of the NBN will be built by NBN Co rather than the private sector, which I think was what the
government has just made that decision.
The government, rather than Mr Quigley. All right. The implementation study recommended that the private sector put that together. Maybe I'll just direct this to you then, Minister. Why has that call been made?
We believed ultimately we'd get a better configuration, structure, integration by having NBN Co build it.
That's kind of bland.
Yeah, Mr Quigley might want to...
Yep.
Great.
If we're trying to provide the same services to the entire population and make it easy for retail service providers to get to them with the same processes, same interfaces, same everything for them, then the boundaries between fibre and wireless and between wireless and satellite are not well defined until you actually get on the ground and do the local design engineering there. So even making a call about where those boundaries lie is very difficult to do up front. And then once you do that, you're offering potentially different types of services. So you'll have these discontinuities between the fibre service, the wireless service and the satellite service.
Okay, easy to just keep the whole lot in-house.
Yep.
Is that likely to make any differences to the economic assumptions that fell out of the McKinsey study?
No, I don't think.
Well, as I said, NBN's got its own assumptions, which will be available shortly. The McKinsey study was advice to government. And after listening to a range of advice from a range of people, we've made the call that we made. And Mr Quigley's business case or the information largely available from it will be out there.
And if I can just add, Senator, for you, there's one other piece of information that's very important is once again comes this difference between a fixed wireless network and a mobile network. They are like chalk and cheese. They're engineered totally differently. All we're using in the wireless network, fixed wireless network, we're using spectrum for that last access piece. Everything else about the service looks like a fixed line service.
Yeah.
So to think you can just piggyback on a mobile service to provide equivalent service is kind of a false assumption.
Yeah.
Board discuss this issue prior to the government making its decision?
Yeah, yes, of course. The board, I take to the board all of these various options and considerations and technical details, and they are discussed, as you would expect.
I'm just trying to ascertain when the minister says it was the government's decision, as to whether it was the government's decision based on a recommendation then.
No, we took advice from a range of people, starting with McKinsey's and obviously including NBN, the department, and the government formed a judgment that this was the best path to proceed with.
And did McKinsey's, in the development of their implementation study, canvass where they were going on this matter with you, Mr Quigley?
We had, as I said before here, that we worked quite closely with the implementation study people as we went through a whole range of issues. And we shared a lot of information during that process, as you would expect us to. It was a very, very productive and useful process.
Certainly, and in regards to this particular issue, do you recall McKinsey and yourself? Obviously, you appear to firmly support the government's decision to decide that it should remain integrated as part of NBN Co.
I think both the McKinsey team and the team inside NBN Co understand that we form views, we put those to government, and the government makes decisions on those in an informed way. Now, it doesn't mean that always our views are going to be identical. Nobody, I think, in either team would expect that. So we come at it from sometimes different angles. We put our view in front of the government. We expect the government to make decisions, and both NBN Co, I think, and McKinsey, KPMG, understand that process.
Let me put it relatively bluntly. Did you put your view in front of McKinsey and they rejected it and came to a different conclusion, but you put your view to the government?
No, it didn't. It just simply didn't work that way.
Right. So did you have frank discussions about this aspect of McKinsey's recommendations when they were developing their implementation study?
Of course. We had some robust debates about different subjects,
right,
which was a very healthy and useful thing to do.
Chair, and either to the Minister or Mr Quigley, probably Senator Conroy, this might be more yours. The ACCC's recent downgrade of the valuation of Telstra's copper network from $23 billion to something more like $7.5 billion, and reduced at the same time the wholesale price that Telstra is allowed to charge from $26 to $20. So what implications does this have, A, for your business model, Mr Quigley, but also for the Telstra NBN or the Telstra government deal and the reported the heads of agreement involving
this is a draft. That's the first point to make. It's a draft recommendation. So ultimately, it may not be their final recommendation. Certainly, different companies in the sector have different perspectives about this. Telstra obviously have a strong view. Other companies have equally a strong view, perhaps in a different direction. So the ACCC have made its draft available, for public comment. And I'm not going to canvass the government's view publicly. We'll put that, we'll consider the position and look at what the final determination is.
Have you got McKinsey's or anybody else working on a revamp of the document of the implementation study in the light of that draft decision? You're correct, but also in the light of the proposed heads of agreement itself, or the proposed deal itself, which came about after you received the implementation study, which I would have thought substantially alters the economics of the project. You would argue
the answer is no. We don't have McKinsey's reworking anything on the basis of the draft determination.
Okay, so we're still acting solely on the basis of the implementation study, despite a lot of quite important events.
Well, when you say acting on, they're recommendations and advice to government. We also receive advice from the NBN. We also are aware of the NBN's view of the determination, and we're not acting solely on the implementation study.
All right, there's lots more I could go into. I might have to leave it there. Thank you, Chair, and thanks both.
Okay, Senator Troth.
Now, Minister, the government has stated that it intends to eventually privatise the NBN Co. Is this still the government's intention?
It's the government's policy.
Government policy. So how many years after the completion of the NBN Co rollout is it envisaged that privatisation would take place?
What we announced at the time, and continues to be our position, is that we would look to privatise it around 5 years, but without wanting to set a definitive,
Yes.
it will be this day of this year.
Yes.
You could, for instance, have another global financial crisis. So to sell an asset in the middle of the biggest downturn would be, on behalf of taxpayers, would be a dereliction of duty.
Right.
So there is a degree of flexibility, but the notional figure we use is around 5 years. After the completion of the build.
Which
It's
is
an
expected to
8-year
take
build.
8 years,
Yep.
is that correct?
Yes.
So another 13 years approximately after that?
Yes. 2023, I think, is a rough time to aim for.
So you won't preside over the same.
Look, I'm planning on still being here, yes.
I know I won't be, so that's quite all
Look,
right.
Collingwood will be into its 15th consecutive premiership by then, and I may be considering retiring.
I'm sorry I asked.
I'll
Now, let's
leave
get back to some
that.
reality.
My next
Good
question.
Hansard note, I'm being stoned.
Bring the Minister back to some reality, will
So,
you?
Minister, does the government agree with the recommendations of the implementation study in regard to the eventual privatisation, such as the proposed limits on shareholdings by telecommunications retailers?
Look, we've always argued strongly that there should be a limitation. We've said from day one that there shouldn't be a capacity for an existing retail service provider to gain control of NBN Co. So where we fall on the final caps, we're still considering, but we absolutely believe that we intend to ensure that this remains a wholesale-only company and cannot be controlled by a retailer either now or in the future.
So that's one recommendation that you do agree
I'm
with?
saying we haven't made a final decision on the level of the cap, but in general, I think it's fair to say that's a reasonable proposition.
Okay.
Just
Yes.
jump back to the previous question, just on one point there. The government's caveats accepted. The government's timeline for its expectation of pursuing privatisation isn't altered at all by the changed policy of the government as a result of the deal with the independents.
No, as I keep saying, it makes no difference. The same number of places have still got to be built to. This idea suddenly...
I do understand, but it
there was
does,
a blowout.
I
I genuinely repeat, and you weren't looking after this area, I genuinely repeat...
It does change the economics of your startup.
The laziness of the analysis has been stunning.
It does change the economics of your startup, but if it doesn't change your long term on privatisation, that was the only question, Senator Troth.
Thank you. Now, Minister, the government has repeatedly justified the NBN on the basis of its large contribution to economic productivity. And I would, of course, assume that there's a list of peer-reviewed economic literature that backs up these claims.
There's a whole range of studies across the globe that have highlighted the benefits of broadband. There is a couple of just microeconomic reports my own department released recently. I could point you to an Access Economics IBM Fibre to the Node study last year, and I understand that the OECD is about to produce a major piece of work on this. Right across the world there are studies that go to and show the overall benefits of
I'm sure
broadband towards productivity.
The committee would be grateful if you could provide us with...
look, we could pull together a list.
A comprehensive list,
Thank
you.
But importantly, due out very, very shortly is a major OECD study on it.
Okay. Is there any peer-reviewed economic literature which shows any quantifiable economic benefits from an increase in broadband speeds from the ADSL 2+ speeds currently available to most Australian businesses?
I'm not sure anyone's done it on the scale we have, so I'm not sure you could actually point to anything. But to give you an example, Access Economics, this was the study I referred to, estimates that the adoption of smart technologies in energy, water, health and transport and the rollout of high-speed broadband could add 70,000 jobs to the Australian economy and add 1.5% to Australia's GDP within a few years. The OECD states that the effective use of high-speed broadband can provide significant improvements in productivity and efficiency across a number of sectors such as energy, health, education and transport. As I said, I'm happy to get you more detail there, just a couple of quick quotes.
That would be helpful to the committee, given that we'll be obviously doing some ongoing work on this, I would think. So has Access Economics Study, was that one of the ones that you mentioned?
Yeah, Access Economics did a fibre to the node study with IBM last year, which wasn't the sort of speeds we're talking about as fibre to the home.
Right.
And recently we commissioned Access Economics to look at a couple of different sectors. They estimate the value of a 10% increase in Australian employees at telework 50% of the time at between 1.4 billion and 1.9 billion per annum. Other benefits included decreased fuel consumption, less congestion and savings on infrastructure. A trial by National ICT's Australian Water Information Networks project found that smart water infrastructure reduced water use by 26%. As I said, we're happy to get you a whole range of these papers.
Yeah, okay. Well, that would be useful. Now, I gather that the access work is based on the difference between universal use of dial-up and universal access to 12 megabits per second. Now,
as I said, it was fibre to the node, yes.
All right, so that's what was studied. Now, most Australians already have access to broadband.
Well, it depends on what you're defining. Depends on what you're defining as broadband. It is, again, one of Mr Turnbull's tragic silver spoon approaches from living in Point Piper or Potts Point, whichever one of those North Shore suburbs, eastern suburbs that it is.
Well, Senator Conroy, you told me
when he says all Australians have in metropolitan Australia have broadband, it's just wrong. 1.2 million. And this is from your own policy document. Because it's taken from the implementation stage.
She said most Australians.
Most Australians don't have access.
Earlier tonight, you told me that.
False.
You told me that more than 60% of premises have fixed line broadband service.
It depends on your definition of broadband. You can't pretend if you have a fixed line connection, you can still use it as dial-up. You can get 1 meg and say I've got broadband. But if you're actually talking about real broadband, most Australians don't have access to real broadband. That's why you lost seats in some places and got swings against you all across Tasmania.
You're talking about Senators, Minister, Senator Troth has... Senator McDonald...
Enough to form government.
Senator Troth.
Enough to form government.
Leaving that aside, including your personal abuse of Mr Turnbull, to which I take great exception, isn't it true that most Australians already have access to broadband?
Define broadband.
Broadly defined, and
as
so
what?
Aren't the vast majority of these productivity gains
60%
already
had access
available?
to a fixed line and took a broadband service. Now I'm asking you to define what you mean by have broadband.
Well, obviously...
Well, what do you define as broadband services?
I don't define it as 256k or 512 or even 1 meg download
So you're
only.
suggesting that everyone that's selling it as broadband is misleading the market?
No, there is no internationally agreed definition of broadband.
Well, don't change the definition to suit your answer.
I'm saying to you, in a modern world,
wasting our time.
I'm saying to you, the sort of services that
Whoever's
we're going to
chairing
provide
the committee
is
should
real
bring the minister
broadband.
to the heel.
I think I need to bring you to order, Senator Colbeck. Minister, have you finished?
All right.
No, you're asking me a question, but I'm asking you to clarify what you mean by the premise of your statement. Because I'm disagreeing with the premise of your statement.
Well, in that case, we'll have to disagree, Minister.
Thank you.
I'll move on to the next question.
Thank you, Senator Trout.
What proportion of the bandwidth that will be available to the 93% of Australians in the fibre footprint does the department's modelling suggest will be used for entertainment? What proportion of the bandwidth that will be available to the...
We don't have any modelling at all.
You don't have any modelling?
We've never modelled entertainment.
All right. So you don't know what percentage will be used on television, gaming, video on demand?
We're not planning on telling people what they can use their broadband network for.
You present it to them and they can use it as they like?
They can use it as they like.
And you haven't done any as to what this will
We're
be.
not going to tell them what they can use their broadband network for.
So therefore you won't be able to tell me what percentage of the bandwidth will be used for directly productive purposes like health, education or work-related usage?
Directly productive. So the entertainment and industry is not a directly productive part of the economy?
Well,
So I'm just borrowing her exact words.
You keep telling us you're not doing this thing just so people can download movies.
Well, the trick is at the moment most people can't access the health service, the education services, etc. They actually can't access them because the infrastructure is not good enough.
And you're not able to give Senator Troth an answer as to what extent you expect the productivity benefits from accessing such services to be?
I've said there's a whole range of studies which we will happily supply, and there's a major OECD one due very, very shortly about the benefits, trans-sector benefits, meaning health, education, aged care, veterans care, smart grids, sustainable energy policy, and I could go on, a whole range of areas like that. 80% of the R&D in a car nowadays is in the IT. 80% in the IT.
You're not rolling cable out to cars, though, Senator Conlon.
No, but the point I'm making is that it's the definition of productive, which is, again, a premise that...
Well, I would say that measurably adds to economic productivity. For instance, can you describe...
Well, as I said,
an application
we're happy to provide those studies to you.
That directly and measurably adds to economic productivity, which would not be deliverable over the current networks available in Australian cities, but would be deliverable through the NBN.
Yeah, conferencing,
teleworking. Just to give you one very simple example, and I've already quoted a statistic about the value to the economy. My department has done the modelling with Access Economics on that. E-health, virtual consultations, monitoring in the home. Can't be done. Let me be really clear about this. You cannot monitor somebody 24/7 every second on a existing fixed wireless or some of the copper that we've got in the ground to guarantee the security of the service, meaning it doesn't go blip, whoops, what happened in that 5 minutes when it was turned off.
So what's the minimum speed you need for that, Minister?
Well, high-definition video conferencing for the consultations, engineering joke. If you're Italian, probably 6 meg up as well. If you're English, possibly only 4 meg. You take an average, if you like, of 5. Okay? 5 up. See, that's when Mr Turnbull keeps making the argument about broadband, which is why I had the argument with you about the definition of broadband. It's not just about download speed. It's about capacity. Capacity meaning up as well. The A in ADSL is asymmetric, meaning it's really good for coming down, but not that great at going up. And you need the symmetry for the new services that are already available around the rest of the world and are coming now. I know you actually understand this and get this already, but genuinely, that's why I'm having the argument with you about broadband. It's not just about a download speed. And that's why it's so important to put this infrastructure in the ground. It's about the capacity of the network.
And the type of in-home monitoring example you've used, what's the speed you see?
Well, it depends on what type of in-home monitoring it is. In the modelling, I don't know if you saw our launch, you probably were genuinely busy during the election campaign. We launched at the NBN in Tasmania, we launched a in-home monitoring of a nursing application. It was a unit that connected onto the national broadband network, and it provided all sorts of interactivity for an 82-year-old lady who we talked to direct on the video conference link. And that sort of service could only be delivered, and it did a whole range of things. I'm happy to get you a briefing on it, happy to get the company who produces it to come and sit down and take you through it. Can only be done on a fibre network. Can't be done on the copper. Can't be done. You can try it on the copper, but it just doesn't quite work, and it certainly doesn't work on the wireless. That's just like, seriously, this is not an exaggeration.
Okay. Well, you can certainly table some information for the committee, and if I need a briefing, I'll let you know.
We'll look at it. Now, my last question, Minister. There's been much discussion of a digital divide in Australia. Now, given that the NBN involves 7% of Australians being served by networks that deliver 12 megabits per second...
Sorry, did you say 70 or 7?
7.
7%?
Yes. Rather than 100 megabits per second, is it fair to suggest that access to 12 megabits per second is sufficient as a basic level of service?
Look, there will be some services that may not be possible to do on a satellite service versus a fixed wireless service versus a fibre. I'm happy for Mr Quigley to take you through the technical constraints of satellite versus fixed wireless versus fibre. But unless your argument is, well, we only wanted to do about 50% of the population and you're only doing 93, you're not doing 100, therefore you shouldn't do it. It's an interesting quirk on the argument, but it's not going to stop us actually proceeding. But if you're actually genuinely interested in
Yes, I am
the capacity
genuinely
constraints,
interested,
Mr Quigley might want to, I'm sure, take you through dimensioning and satellites and distance. And
Yep. The fundamental issue, Senator, of course, is the bandwidth available on fibre is almost unlimited. The bandwidth available for both satellite and for wireless is quite limited because you've got a certain bandwidth of spectrum that you can use, and you've got to fit so many bits per hertz into that spectrum. So fundamentally, wireless is limited. The only way you can get over that is make cell sites smaller and smaller and smaller till really, and each one of those, these days you fibre feed, so you end up with the same type of network for those speeds. So fundamentally, you just can't get over the laws of physics of what you can do with wireless and satellite. And as we know, the cost curve of deploying fibre, as you reach further and further out to these last few percent of people, becomes very, very high. So that's why you really have to provide the satellite and the wireless service. But if I can reiterate, the way in which we're dimensioning the satellite service and the wireless service is very different from today's mobile networks and today's satellite networks. We're dimensioning for much greater capacities so that people in the last 7% will really get a service that is at least as good, if not better, than ADSL 2 Plus today. Because remember when we talk about ADSL 2 Plus being 24 megabits, that's really at the very centre. It's not very far out, so you're down below 12 megabits per second. There's a big chunk of people on the copper network who will never get 12 megabits per second on DSL.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. In part you've answered one of my questions, but I'll go over that anyway so that we can just get that clarified. According to the ABS, regional Australians represent approximately 32% of the population, so obviously they won't all be receiving satellite or wireless services. What percentage of them will?
It's 7%. So 7% of will. Fibre, 93% of premises. So it'll only be the remaining 7% which will get either wireless or satellite. So of those 32% in rural areas, the vast majority will have a fibre service.
Thank you. We've already established that many of the fibre sites from which the NBN will fan out are in regional areas. But what about those remote Australians who will receive wireless and satellite? Given that there are no first release sites today for wireless and satellite, what does this mean for them receiving it? Does that mean that they're going to receive it much later than the rest of us?
No, one of the things we're doing now as a result of the prioritisation of regional Australia is trying to accelerate the process of providing what we're calling a wireless solution for that 4%, and then an interim satellite solution using existing capacity that's there. So we're working within NBN Co just as hard and fast as we possibly can to provide those two services, the wireless services and the interim satellite service, as soon as we can get them up and working. And as part of the overall business plan corporate plan that we provide to the government, we will have all of the timings and the details of those services.
I'm not sure if you've covered this, but for the KA band satellite services, what average speed improvements will people receive from those typically available to residential users today?
We're talking there about probably something like 20 times, between 10 and 20 times better than what they've got today, both in terms of, certainly in terms of throughputs, because it's not just about speeds, it's also about the throughputs, the download capacities that you can get. So there'll be a big jump, even on the interim satellite service, for those people who are taking that satellite service.
On the issue of home wiring, is it necessary for a customer to receive the benefits? Can you explain what it is required in home wiring for a customer to receive the benefits of the National Broadband Network?
They need to do almost nothing. As we talked about before, you don't need to rewire the house. And I know there has been a lot of speculation in various pieces of the press, some of which we've tried to give them in reality. They're just frankly not interested in hearing it. But today, many homes have Wi-Fi, for example, so they don't need to do any wiring. Even the people who got copper pay service, they reticulate around their home, they can stick with that. What we did in Tasmania, and we're likely to do that in the rollout, is when we come in to provide that NTU or ONT into the home, we asked the end user where they would like it placed. And so we put it where they would like it placed, and in most cases they just plug straight into their PC or plug straight into their residential gateway, and the service is up and running. It runs like it did before, except faster and better and greater capacities and faster speeds. Now, if they want to reticulate their home for video, for example, that's a different proposition. They can choose to do that even if they wanted to use some other technology today.
How does the service differ from that of, say, Foxtel?
Well, in Foxtel, what's provided there is a suite of channels in which people pick off certain channels which are running at a certain time, and it's over a coaxial cable, and the coaxial cable is a shared medium. In other words, the channels are going down to every home down the street that's taking the service, and you pick off those channels. Fibre is different. You've got an individual fibre to every home, and so you can stream services personalised. It doesn't just have to be that particular channel. They can take educational material, any material from anywhere in the world that you can get over the web. There will also be video services, some entertainment services, some educational channels, a line-up which we know after talking to a wholesale IPTV provider. And that will be provided over the fibre infrastructure much better than you can provide it over copper today. So it'll be if you like, an enhanced type video service.
Yeah, and if I could just add, I mean, the Foxtel comparison is, I think, relevant here, Senator Wortley, because when Foxtel deliver you a service, they deliver it to one point. They then say to you, if you'd like it in another room, to get the equivalent service in another room, it'll cost you $15 a month. We'll happily put another connection into another room for you, and we'll charge you another fee for running it in another room. So that's a standard, normal business proposition if you want to take your Foxtel service from one room and have an equivalent service in another room.
Senator McEwen has got a follow-up question on that.
Just on the same type of issue, there's claims made that fibre technology doesn't have a life long enough to guarantee a return on investment. Can you make some comment about that, Mr Quigley?
Yes, I have heard those, and I've had the same debates with some of the media who simply, as I said before, they're not particularly interested in the facts in this issue. It astonishes me, to be honest, Senator, given that we are seeing huge increases worldwide of fibre deployments. Companies such as AT&T, Verizon, DT, all throughout Asia, all of them deploying fibre. We speak to the manufacturers of fibre. They simply don't know how long the fibre will last because they can see no mechanism by which it would degrade. Unlike copper, which is metal and is carrying current, there's a natural tendency then, you get levels of corrosion. This is glass. It's inherently stable. It's strengthened. Clearly, if somebody puts a spade through it, as they would through a piece of copper, they'll break it. But there's no inherent reason why this fibre should degrade over time. It's very, very stable. So there has been lots of reports about 12-year lives, and I don't know where this data is coming from, but it certainly is not supported by the evidence we see overseas, not supported by any of the people who should know, who are the fibre manufacturers. I couldn't, frankly. I can't put a lifespan on it because it's one of those things. The copper network, by the way, some of it's been in the ground now 50, 60 years, still providing service, getting more and more expensive to maintain. It's very, very difficult to put a lifespan. It'd be at least 30 years, at least 30 years.
Do you want on this point?
Yeah, well, I recall a statement by Minister Conroy about a life of 40 years for the system, for the investment. And I just... I
took the midpoint between a 30 and 50-year lifespan of it.
So it's just something that you've extrapolated on, effectively? Yeah.
No.
Well,
if you listen to the evidence that Mr Quigley's just given you, and he does know a bit about this, it's a 30-year upwards. Now, most of the other experts who've commented, Mr Quigley was being modest, talk about between 30 and 50 years. But if you take the midpoint of that and say, OK, it's a 40-year lifespan,
And commercial telcos are investing billions around the world.
Look, I understand the point, but I mean,
Senator Colbeck,
it is about the depreciation.
You.
Well, it's the same issue, and we can come back to it later, I
I'll
suppose.
be coming to you. Senator Barnett's been anxious for the call, and I'll come back to you, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Chair. I do appreciate that. And my question's relating to the rollout of the NBN in Tasmania, and they're related to, if possible, to Mr Quigley, and specific questions as best I can, and obviously if the Minister jumps in, that's noted, but I think it relates to you, Mr Quigley, and you can answer the questions. And I'll go firstly to your opening statement, if I could. And you've talked about the Stage 1 orders that have been received, 561 services, etc.
Yes.
Can I assume that's Smithton, Scottsdale and Midway Point?
You can, yes.
Thank you so much. What's the total population of those three towns?
Off the top of my head, I don't know what the population are in those three towns.
Right. Well, it's in the order of 3,500, 2,000 and 2,500, so a bit less than 10,000 in total. Does that sound about right to you?
Well, this is homes rather than population.
Okay.
We put five to homes, not five
yes.
to people, so...
Well, okay. In terms of homes, so 3,500, 2,000 and 2,500, does that sound about right to you?
Mr. Quigley? It sounds right or right. I think it could well be.
And so far you've got about a 50% connection rate, just clarifying, because that's been on the public record.
Yes.
Is that your understanding? Right. Correct?
Yes.
Right. And is the connection rate to the property, the actual building, or is it to the edge of the property on the street?
It's to the building.
Thank you. Now, based on this opening statement, you've received 561 services to be delivered to 436 premises, and 262 premises are now active. That's as at today?
That's probably the end of September, I believe. We don't. I mean, I can't tell you what the numbers are as of today. I didn't check.
Well, this is you've made this statement today. So 262 premises are now active. That's what it says.
Yes, which means it could be somewhat more than that as it continues to grow day by day.
Of course. So let's say it's 30 September. You think that might be the date?
I think that's probably the date this data was on.
To the best of your knowledge, 30 September. So 262 premises are active. So that means those premises have actually signed up and they have an active service that's operating.
Correct.
Right. What's the percentage sign-up rate at the moment?
Sorry?
The connection rate is 50%. What is the sign-up rate? Based on my calculation, 262 out of about 8 to 10,000 is...
Well, firstly, you're still
is
using
less than
between
4 and 6%.
You're still using a population number, not a house.
No, I was using a household number.
Oh, I thought you said it was population.
Well,
when you read out the
3,500, 2,000, 2,500. Let's assume it's household numbers. I'm happy to take a lower figure if you've got one, but you must know how many households you have connected.
Will you be inventing the $700 million figure in this line of questions?
No, we'll come to that.
No, I just want to know if you're going to repeat your own invention. It's beautiful the way
we'll come
it
to
works.
that.
You made up a number.
Right,
You've got a few mates to repeat it
Mr.
often.
Quigley, what's your sign-up rate to date?
We don't have a sign-up rate, Senator. It's up to the retail service providers.
Right. Do you know the sign-up rate?
We know the connection rate. It's not, frankly, in the pre-release, as I said before, in Tasmania, we're not trying to extrapolate anything for the national rollout. This was a trial that we were doing to learn various things about operational practices.
Let me give you a practical comparison because I already know where you're going. The implementation study, if you go to it and you have a look at it, it found a positive business case based upon an assumed annual take-up rate of only between 6 and 12%. And I'm not sure...
And this is around about 4 to 6%, the way I read those figures.
I actually think it's...
Say again?
I actually think it's higher than that if you look at the 500 who've taken who've ordered. We've only got connected. But if you go to the ones who've actually ordered to come and connect, okay, you actually find that is at least in the mid, I think, of the 6 to 12, if not at the top end of the 6 to 12. So let me repeat.
Right. Could you take that on notice?
That's an annual... No, let me finish. That's an annual figure. So what the implementation study says, quite clearly, is an assumed take-up of only 6 to 12%. And what we've already got in 4 months is virtually higher than that in 4 months, not 12 months. So
in 12 months, what would you expect?
What I'm saying to you is the implementation study found a positive business case
Thank you, Minister.
of a take-up of only 6 to 12%. No, you've gone for the 250. Go for the 500. It doubles it.
Households in the regions. I'm just giving you the answer.
Yeah, but in the region doesn't
In
necessarily.
those 3 locations, there are 5,000 households.
And we've got 500
Minister,
requests for large service, 10%.
Yeah, look, can we just get a bit of order here? Senator Barnett's got the call.
Senator Colbeck and I are in agreement. It's
Yeah.
about, at this point, with orders 10%, which is near the top end of the 6 to 12%. And that's only in 4 months as opposed to 12 months.
Senator Barnett.
But if you then want to do what you've continued to tragically do, which is to make up an
I'm
end...
happy to have a debate, but not here. I just want to ask some questions through you, Chair.
You've done it.
I'm trying to ask a question.
You've claimed the bill costs $700
Hold
million.
on a sec. Let the minister finish, then you'll get the call.
You've made the claim
He's
consistently
not
in
answering the question.
Tasmania.
I haven't asked a question, Chair.
Well, I'm giving you...
He keeps telling me
The
things.
good news is you're getting some extra information.
Okay, Senator Conroy. Right, well, right.
I already know the question.
Right, Senator Conroy. Senator Conroy. Yeah. Yeah, Senator Conroy, can you please desist from continuing to engage with every senator here? Senator Barnett has got a question. I'd like that question to be answered. Senator Barnett.
Right. Mr Quigley, if I could ask you, Mr Quigley has made an opening statement. I'm asking a question of Mr Quigley.
Just
all questions go through the minister unless the minister chooses to throw them. That's just the rules.
That's right. So, Senator Barnett, if you've got a question, let's move on.
That's right. Mr Quigley, how many people have connected to the NBN in Tasmania?
I think he's stated that in the opening
No,
statement.
that's signed up. How many are connected?
You said that as well.
You said it's a 50% connection rate.
Okay,
How
so
many
50.
is 50%, Mr
Minister,
Quigley?
could you just let him answer the question?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Senator. I'm not sure what
You
you're
have
asking.
advised the committee there's a 50% connection rate. How many have connected?
No, I asked.
You need to read it.
I said there was at 50%, roughly a 50% consent rate. I can give you the exact numbers by each of the towns.
Mr Quigley, please.
46% in Midway Point, 62% Scottdale, 48% Smithton.
Right, can you give us numbers behind the percentages, please?
No, I can't. They're consents. They're the percentage of the premises in which we have offered to them a connection of a fibre, and the percent that's consented to have that fibre.
Right, Mr
connected.
Quigley, can I put something to you? I'm happy for you to take it on notice. Could you please give us the figures behind the percentages on notice? You don't have it with you. Please put it on notice.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Thank you. You mean, are you talking about the numbers of premises in each of these?
Yes, I'm asking about the you've said consent, the connection rate. You've given us different percentages for the 3 different towns. I want the numbers behind the percentages.
At today's date, or
yes,
when I talk about these, because it changes day by day.
The latest date. Mm-hmm. Okay, on notice. Thank you. Can you then, please, on notice, give us the sign-up rate in percentages and in numbers at the latest date, please?
Sign up for what?
To the NBN.
For what?
You mean take a live service?
For a broadband.
Take a retail.
To take a retail service.
And you're talking about orders or services being activated?
Both. Mm-hmm. Can you please take that on notice?
Yeah, we can take that on notice.
Thank you, Mr Quigley. What is the cost of the rollout to the NBN code Tasmania? What is the cost of the rollout to date? Mr Quigley, can you advise the committee?
As opposed to the $700 million you keep making
No,
up.
I've asked what is the cost of the rollout in Tasmania to date?
Okay, well, what I have to do is to answer that question properly is split it into different parts. There is a backbone part that will be used for a much wider area, and then there's the access part. So I'll give you these 2 splits, if you like. I think that's where you're trying to get to.
No,
He'd actually
like to add them up and then distort the figure completely as he's been
Mr
doing.
Quigley, I'm happy for you to break it down. I'd like a total figure, and then if you'd like to break it down, I'm more than happy. Can you please give us the figures?
We can do that, yes. Fine. I have to take that one on notice,
right.
Obviously.
Thank you. What is the budgeted cost of the rollout of the NBN in Tasmania to complete the rollout?
There has been no published figure.
No, I'm asking Mr Quigley.
You fantasised a $700 million figure and put it around, but it's never actually been a figure put forward by the National Broadband Network.
Do you have a budget?
What is the figure, Mr Minister?
Well, there's a range of negotiations that have still been going on, and there is no final figure.
So how do the negotiations relate to your budget?
Can we hold that?
There's a national build figure, but on an individual contract you can get a higher or lower price.
Nothing to do with the budget, Senator. You've already said that the project so far has come in under budget, and you've got a build figure for a certain proportion of it, and Mr Quigley is going to give us those figures.
Senator Colbeck,
You haven't tendered for
Senator
the
Colbeck,
No,
can I
They
just before you do this?
I'm not saying that, and you deliberately misinterpret the question.
Senator Conroy, just before we go, can I ask you not to enter into an argument
I'm not
with the
entering
minister?
into an
No,
argument.
you
I'm
did.
just simply asking
Enter into an argument with the minister, then complain when you get argument coming back. Can I just say to you that we can go back? You're next. You get the call next. Can we let Senator Barnett finish his questioning, and then we'll move to you straight after Senator
Mr
Barnett.
Quigley, in your opening statement you said that the project is on time and on budget, and in fact, to quote you, you said it's slightly below budget.
That's correct.
What is the budget?
Okay. When I'm talking about
stage one.
Stage one. We're talking about stage one for those
Mr.
three
Quigley,
communities.
what is the budget?
I'm not sure we've made that number public at this point.
Let's start with stage one, Mr Quigley. Mr Quigley.
Senator Barnett.
No, Senator Fisher, the last thing we want
I
is
know
you
that that's
assisting
100 million.
at this stage.
We can make the number public.
Mr Quigley, you were going to answer the question regarding stage one, so perhaps you could answer that.
We had a project which was called Stage 1, which was these three communities to provide them with a fibre-based service. We established a budget for that work, and we established a time frame for that work. We finished it on time, and we came in slightly under budget.
Mr Quigley.
And I'm not sure we've made the budget number public.
And why think Mr Quigley indicated earlier, I'm trying to help here, Senator Barnett, was that there were two components to it, and he undertook to come back to you with some information on the different components.
There's a backhaul component, which is you share in a much bigger population than just those three communities. So it's, in fact, it's a completely distorted picture to add the two together and divide by the number of customers. It's a nonsense.
Right. So, Mr Quigley, on notice, could you clarify and avoid any of the nonsense and put on the record the figures as you understand them?
Certainly.
Would you do that, Mr Quigley?
I can do that.
Thank you.
Take it on notice. Yep.
That would be really good.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. The Tasmanian NBN is a joint venture.
No, we've had that discussion already.
Yeah, and no, I'm about to come to that. And the Minister indicated that it hasn't been consummated as yet. What is the equity or proposed equity differential between the state government and the federal government in that
Well, as I
joint
said,
venture?
there's been no final agreement reached, and I wouldn't want to speculate on what the final outcome is.
All right. Well, can I ask you a question, Minister, directly relating to this? What is the funds invested in the rollout of the NBN in Tasmania by the federal government? You've invested, you made a media release of $100 million invested to date.
I'd have to take that on notice about how much has been spent in Tasmania. I genuinely have to take that on notice.
Right, thank you. Can you advise how much you have budgeted for to spend on the rollout of the NBN in Tasmania?
I haven't budgeted anything. The NBN Co themselves would have a budget figure, but as in any commercial operation, if you tell the people that you're going to ask to bid for work, how much money you've got in your pocket before you start, you usually end up spending all of the money in your pocket. So I'm sure that Mr Quigley won't want to reveal how much he's got in his pocket when he's going to be engaged in a range of tender processes, so that we can ensure that taxpayers get best value for money.
Okay. Minister, could you take that on notice and consider the possibility of actually answering the question?
I've just given you an answer. We don't intend to speculate and reveal to companies how much money is potentially available, so that they can set their bids at higher than they might otherwise.
Thank you, Minister.
Tender processes.
Thank you, Minister. I have two questions.
It's a normal commercial matter, Senator McDonald.
Minister, if I could, I have two questions through you, Chair.
Senator Barnett.
I have two questions. What is the cost to the NBN Co to connect the service per home, per premises?
There is no one number. It depends on the premise, the length of the fibre, but it depends on a huge number of parameters.
Well, give us the average cost, Mr Quigley.
I really wouldn't. It would be very unwise of me to do that at this point in time, Senator. I'd be prejudicing discussions and negotiations that are underway now. It would be a very silly thing for me to do.
Is it correct that the fee you are charging the retail service providers currently is zero?
Yes, we've said that repeatedly in Tasmania in the pre-release trial.
And that's on an interim basis. When does the interim basis conclude?
Conclude? We've advised middle of next year.
30 June next year?
Yes.
Right. And you've indicated in your opening statement that there are a number of lessons learned from the Tasmanian rollout. Can you advise the committee what lessons you have learned?
Yeah, there's a variety of ones related to operational practices. So I'll take that on notice, but it will be an interesting engineering.
Well, if you could, Mr Quigley, if you could take it on notice. And my final question is this. In the early documents that were released, I was advised that the cable would be distributed above ground and it would take up 520 kilometres of the 560 kilometres of cable to be rolled out throughout Tasmania, and that's some 96%. Is that accurate? And if not, what is the accurate figure?
I'll have to take that one on notice as well.
So is that from a question on notice that you got previously, Senator Barnett?
No, it's based on documents that were released some months ago from Aurora, and it's on the public record, and I can dig that up if you want to, but
so
it's on the public record.
So that wasn't an NBN figure?
No, it was from Aurora.
And what was that in relation to?
It was based on...
what was the document about?
It was a document from Aurora, but it was based on terms of
to
reference.
Who?
From NBN to Aurora, and it was an Aurora document.
Sorry,
they had a contract.
Aurora released an NBN document?
Aurora had a contract with NBN, and no doubt you can check that in your files, and in that document it referred to the fact that the cables were going above ground in 520 of the 560 kilometres of the rollout at that time. I'm asking you if that's accurate, and secondly, if you can confirm what is accurate if it's not, and the percentage of above-ground cable for the rollout in Tasmania.
In Tasmania, we always indicated the vast majority was going to be above ground. I think that's right, because we had no...
Thank you.
I'm saying I suspect that the numbers you've got there are probably accurate, Senator Barnett, on the basis that we were building it with Aurora and not using Telstra's existing ducts.
Thank you. Mr Quigley's indicated I think you'd be happy to take that on notice. If that's the case, I'm appreciative.
Just to make sure I've got the question right, we're talking here about stage one, the 3 towns. We're not talking about Tasmania. Your question relates to the 3 towns in stage 1.
It does, and then I've asked you if that's accurate, and then my supplementary question was I want to know, for the rollout in Tasmania, what percentage of the cable will be above ground? No, across Tasmania.
I can't give you that information at this point.
All right. Well, I've asked you to take it on notice. If you're telling me now you can't answer that question, what's the reason you can't?
No,
because you just don't know.
Can I just ask a clarification? That may be referring to just the connections for homes as opposed to the backhaul. The backhaul would presumably be underground.
And some of it will, some of it isn't. Yes.
Could you take that on notice? I mean, that's
no,
fine.
happy to take
I'm
it on
just
notice.
asking a
We're
simple
not actually,
question.
Thanks.
we're not actually disagreeing with the numbers you put forward.
Right, I'll
Just
ask
to make
Mr.
sure we give you an
Quigley
accurate
to take
answer.
it on
We'll
notice. If the backhaul's underground, please advise us on notice. That would be appreciated.
Senator
Thank
Barnett,
you,
I need
Chair.
to move on now, thanks.
No,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Senator Corbett.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Mr Quigley, you said that the consents continue to vary day by day within the 3 stage 1 locations.
So they possibly could. So a number that was at the end of September may be slightly different from the number today or next week.
I'm just going on information that I have, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, that contractors have effectively, in Circular Head and Smithton, have completed their works there in the rollout, and it goes, and it'll move into the Premier's suggestion that in Tasmania that he will legislate for an opt-out rather than opt-in for a cable to the residents. So a consent, as you call it. So it'll be an opt-out process rather than an opt-in process. Given that initial rollout has effectively been completed in those 3 regions based on the consents that you have at the moment, what's the projected cost to go back into those regions to upgrade that, or will you be doing that at zero cost if the government decides to legislate for an opt-out system?
We haven't modelled or taken account yet of any opt-in or opt-out system at this point in time.
So what is the circumstance that if the initial rollout's completed and contractors have left the sites, what is the circumstances for those who provide a consent now? Are they now obliged to pay a fee?
No, we haven't established that yet. It could be that we're looking at those models as we go forward and looking at the numbers. It could well be that we decide to aggregate, and then it depends on where you're going geographically, because it could be relatively inexpensive to have crews come and do another percentage of the people within what we call a fibre serving area.
So you might come out, wait till you've got a critical mass, come back and do a job lot.
You may, or if people want it, and then again you could offer people the option if they want to wait till the crews are coming back and doing that, or if they want to do it much faster, then there may be a fee. So we're working through those
still
kind
working
of models.
Okay. Can you tell me what the capacity that you currently have across Bass Strait is?
In terms of?
Well, as I understand it, there's 3 cables across Bass Strait.
Yes.
2 owned by Telstra.
That's correct.
And 1 that was installed with the gas pipeline owned by the Tasmanian government. Yes. And I'm presuming it's the one that you're utilising for your service, unless you've got an arrangement with Telstra.
We're handing off a point of interconnect in Midway Point. We don't have to concern ourselves with a link across Tasmania.
So you don't know what the capacity of the 3 cables across Bass Strait is?
The total capacity, I could certainly find out. But
yeah, no, well, I'm interested to know, because my information is that, for example, 1 cable is lit, I stress, is lit currently to a capacity of 100 gig. Right? So that is potentially, depending on the capacity of the 3 cables and what the traffic is being used for them across each of those cables, is a choke point, if you like, for bandwidth in the system. So there's 100 gig of capacity on 1 cable, and I don't know what the capacity on the others is and what the load is on the others, so that's why I'm interested in asking the question. So it's a potential limiting factor for the bandwidth for the system, depending on what the capacity... I mean, it's lit to 100 gigs now. It could be lit to more, and I don't know what the capacity is.
There's ongoing developments in what's called dense wavelength division multiplexing gear.
Yeah.
It could well be that you can light up more wavelengths.
Yeah.
That's a complex question. How many strands, how many fibres are in each cable?
Yes.
What equipment is on the end?
Yep.
What's the characteristics of the fibre? So it's not a simple answer.
But at this point in time, you should be able to do a calculation as to what the capacity of those 3...
We would, but we haven't had any cause to at this point in time.
Yeah, okay. But...
have you seen the map of the total footprint of NBN?
Yeah, look, I have a pretty good understanding of it, Senator.
Because it suggested in the map that there may be some extra Bass Strait?
Well, I mean, that's another
Capacity
question.
that
Well,
could be
again,
made as part
and
of the
again,
NBN.
I mean, that comes back to the question that Senator Fisher asked you before about the implications of a deal or not doing a deal with Telstra. Obviously, that is a potential implication of not finalising a deal with Telstra, having to install additional capacity for you to use if you don't have access to their...
Yes, of course, and that would be a pity.
Yeah.
Would be a pity not to use
Telstra have
resources
existing
for there.
capacity.
Yeah,
Telstra have existing dark fibre capacity,
No.
which I'm guessing sounds like it from what you've described. If one, I can't imagine they only laid 100 meg cable,
100 gig.
100 gig.
across the Bass Strait.
And that's why I stressed that it was lit to that capacity.
Yeah.
Each of the properties that are consent properties that you provide, what is the termination at the residence for each of those properties? What is the termination? Is the cable just rolled up to the house, or...?
It terminates on a little box that actually has a fibre termination on it, ready to then, if the person in premise decides they want then to order a service for a retail service provider, you just connect from that little box down into the optical network termination, the ON2, or network terminating unit.
And that network terminator unit is provided by the service provider.
And that's provided by NBN Co.
At what charge?
That's part of the service. So it's part of the wholesale service.
So at the point where you decide to purchase a service, that extra termination, the network is installed. So there is a termination that comes with the consent, an additional termination from NBN that comes with
through the service, the retail service provider. So
and then the service provider provides their hardware as well.
Yes, potentially.
Yeah. Okay. What choice does does the customer have in the location of that service?
As we said, for example, in Tasmania, we are offering people the option to have the network terminating unit where they desire it.
Okay. So a customer who comes home to find a couple of termination boxes in their lounge room, for example, and there's a photograph that I'm happy to share with anyone who's interested in having a look. And I've had contact from others who found them in their bedroom. The latest in Dacor is a NBN network termination box, and the red light, might I add, unfortunately means there is no service available to that particular box, although I am pleased to say that there is now a service. After my office contacted NBN Co last week, it was connected in 2 days, so that's, I think, a reasonable service once we contacted. But the unfortunate thing is that there's yet another box there. And I just wonder if, how you as an organisation are managing that. It would be an irritant to me to come home and find that sort of equipment, and those boxes are roughly 200 millimetres square and 80 millimetres thick, sitting on the wall in my lounge room. I wouldn't see it as a Dacor item.
So, Colbeck, are you tabling that?
Yeah, I'd like to table that if I could, yes, please.
Look, we obviously need to have a look. It could well be, Senator, that the resident asked us to put the box there. I simply don't know.
That's not as it's been communicated to me, Mr. Quigley. And look, perhaps it's another learning from the stage 1 process. But I've had someone talk to me.
Are you able to give us their name and address?
I'd have to check with that, because my commitment to them at this stage was not to provide that information, particularly in public. But NBN Co have been in touch with them since I've contacted NBN Co about the connection. But I've also had somebody else talking to me about having one of this equipment on their bedroom wall, and it's not necessarily something that I'd like as on my bed. And I've had another customer who's quite satisfied it's been installed in a cupboard in their garage. So I think there's some work to do with respect to communication with residents.
And their customers are saying that they did not ask for them to
That is the very clear implication, Senator Conroy, that I have.
Did they say that where they did ask them to be put?
I'm not sure that there was a communication about that.
Well, how could they come into their premise without some
Well,
communication?
Look, that's a very good question. That's a very good question, and I'm
You're
sorry
not
I don't have an answer
seriously,
to that.
I know, I think
And-
you're
and I'm-
joking,
and I'm-
but seriously, that you're not suggesting they broke and entered.
No, of course
They
not.
only enter with
No,
permission.
look, if I was going to say it, I'd say it. I'm
No.
not about playing or guessing what people might be thinking or anything like that. I'm just saying that this is a circumstance. This customer is not overly happy about this circumstance. I don't think I would be either. Certainly wouldn't be happy about having it in my bedroom. But look, let's leave it as an issue that I've raised with you for you to consider.
Did the individual who had it put in their bedroom, I think it's a serious issue you're raising, did they indicate that they wanted it somewhere else? Or did they say they wanted it in their bedroom and they're just unhappy with the aesthetics?
It's been put to me that the contractor, and I go back to your comments before about safety, and I acknowledge that it's a legitimate issue. For example, I've had one constituent said, "Is it true that NBN Co has said that that the line installers are not allowed into roof spaces?" Now, and it's been confirmed to me that that is an instruction, and given recent controversy about roof spaces, I can understand that, but sometimes to provide a quality connection, it might be required to get into a roof space. So therefore, your comment earlier about providing the correct training for people to do their job in a safe way would come into play. So that is an issue that's been raised with me, and it's been the comment has been made that the connection comes to the front wall, and then quite often it's terminated on the other side of where it arrives. So that's been the practice. Now, whether it's a desirable practice or something that you're looking to see occur, I don't know, but that is, as it's been put to me, that where the line coming to the residence arrives at the wall outside, they come through the wall and they terminate on the other side of where it arrives. And another circumstance that I've been advised of is that if the client says that they want it at the back of the house, because they're not allowed to get into floor spaces or roof spaces, there will be a conduit run up the outside wall, around the underside of the eaves, and then back down on the other side of the house, and then the termination made inside the house at the point where the resident wants it. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily a pleasing aesthetic either. I understand there's logistical issues about making those...
It's underneath the eave?
Yeah. Well, you picture your place and consider...
I've actually got some conduit outside on the side of my house.
Yeah.
So I'm very conscious of what you're describing, so I just want to understand.
Well, that's as
I understand the running up the house and running along the middle of a wall, but running underneath an eave, I would have thought was and I've actually had this. I would have thought running along under an eave is a reasonable way to maintain the aesthetics.
Well,
getting up to the eave may be a problem. Getting down from the eave may be a problem. And seriously, I've had this in my own home. But underneath the eave, I would have thought was the best way to try and maintain the aesthetics.
Well, look, I think we can argue or debate that for some period of time. I don't think it is a reasonable way to maintain an aesthetic, and if NBN Co has suitably trained and qualified installers that can access the spaces they need to access to actually make the connections, and I understand the nervousness and the caution about these sorts of access issues. Don't get me wrong, I understand those, and 25 years in the building industry actually taught me some of the errors. But I'm just trying to make a point about the standards of installation that is being applied.
Senator Colbeck, I have to move on because
I've got one more question. I've got one question.
Three of your colleagues waiting for the
one
call,
question.
I'm sure they won't mind one more
than
question.
they're going to have,
And
so I'm going to move to Senator.
I've got one question.
Very quickly. Then.
Yes, one question. Can you confirm that there are chairs purchased for the fit-out at NBN Canberra to the value of $10,000 each?
NBN Canberra?
Yes. The fit-out...
He's a retired employee.
This information
He's
that
a
I've been...
retired employee in Canberra, Tim.
Well,
He's blushing.
Well, that's his our only employee.
Well, I'm sorry.
I should have stopped when you said that question.
I just want to know. If it's no, it's no. But I've been given. If you don't ask, you don't know. For the fit out for the new HQ in Canberra.
There is no HQ in Canberra.
Well, if I've been misled, I've been misled, and tell me I'm misled.
The HQ
Simple.
Well, we don't really have a HQ, but there's one person in one desk in Canberra, and that's all there is.
And the chair. I know the chair here is not worth $10,000, and there's been often criticism of the chairs and the price of them in this place. Yeah, I'm fine.
I don't know what that was, but we'll certainly check into it.
He's the entire employee.
These boxes that Senator Colbeck showed you are supplied at whose cost?
This is NBN code.
That's it. Yeah,
Equipment. This is an optical network termination, I believe.
And
And
the
once
others
again,
are
this is the pre-trial in Tasmania.
and a battery box.
So it's,
the battery backup.
it's supplied at no cost to the owner and no cost to the retail service provider?
It's part of the monthly charge for the wholesale service. But in Tasmania, there isn't one yet.
So in Tasmania, you're giving away. You told me on the 25th of May that there was a $300 connection fee per household. What do you mean by that?
That's what we said was a nominal charge, but it was waived in the event that retail service providers
Well, you didn't
signed
actually
up.
say it was waived in Tasmania, and the conversation
I
on the
thought we did at that time in
the
May.
conversation on the 25th of May was talking about Tasmania, and you were asked, was there any fee? And you said, yes, there is a connection fee of $300, I believe. I'll have to double-check this. That is $300 per household. This is to the retail service provider.
It's to retail for a connection charge, but was waived. I think I quite
Page 57. No, page 57, you didn't.
Was this a Senate estimates or was this one of the committee
Page
hearings?
57 at the Senate estimates.
Senate estimates.
Now, Mr Quigley, further at Senate estimates, you did confirm, as you've confirmed to Senator Barnett, that in Tasmania, your investment in Tasmania so far is being given away entirely free for a 9-month period until the 30th of June. Is that correct?
I believe that's the case, yes. I believe the 30th of June is the time at which we said the retail service providers needed to come back on to the national pricing. The reason we couldn't do it before is we didn't have a national pricing because we haven't established it yet. Okay. It's all part of the ACCC process.
And so the retail service providers, obviously, in the deals they're giving to their customers, would take into account that as of the 30th of June, they will have to start paying you a fee.
It's up to what the retail
You're making an assumption. You're making a couple of assumptions. We've said consistently from day one that these were introductory prices. Some companies have chosen to price at roughly what they price on the mainland. In other words, Senator McDonald, they probably pocketed the lot. Others have chosen to price cheaper than that, and therefore whether or not those cheaper offerings are kept after that period will be a matter for that company.
Mr Quigley, you indicated the reason of you giving away your network for free in Tasmania was to encourage take-up, which would assume you would have an agreement with the internet service providers that they would pass on the same savings to their customers.
If I can just be clear, Senator, at no point are we giving anything away. We're not giving a network away. We're providing a wholesale service at no charge for a fixed period of time.
For free, yes.
But understanding that is then going to transition to
an introductory paid
service.
I'm conscious of that, Mr Quigley, and that's not my question. Is your arrangement with the ISPs, because you entered into this, as you told us on the 25th of May, that the reason you went into this was to encourage people to take it up, so you gave a cheaper price, so the ISPs would obviously pass on a cheaper price, so people would sign up. Do you have an agreement with the ISPs to pass on the savings of charging nothing for that 9-month period? Do you have an agreement?
I don't have an agreement. We leave the retail pricing to the retail service providers, and if you recall, Senator, what I said was we thought it was perfectly reasonable for this period of time that we provide this service at no charge because these retail service providers were working with us on this very first trial, which meant they had costs which they otherwise wouldn't have for a volume
You've answered my question. Can I just see, I've only got 5 minutes. Now, you've said a couple of times tonight you've said, rather than the Minister, that you're close to providing the government, the Minister, with your business case and corporate plan. Is that correct?
Provided it is approved and agreed by the board of NBN Co.
But you indicated that was coming sooner rather than later.
I'll certainly be putting it very soon to the board.
Okay. In an answer to a question on notice which I asked 5 months ago, and the answer to which was delivered yesterday morning, someone has said, either you or the department, and I quote, "The government has advised NBN Co to delay its submission of its business case and corporate plan until ... The government has considered its response to the implementation study and technical and business planning inputs from NBN Co and ... The government and NBN Co have fully considered the implications of the financial heads of agreement and the definitive agreements with NBN Co and Tasmania." Now, you say you're about to deliver that, so I assume from that the government has now considered its response to the implementation study and the technical business and planning inputs, and secondly, the government and the NBN Co have fully considered the implication of the financial heads of agreement and the definitive agreements between NBN Co and Tasmania. I ask, how can you do that?
And Telstra, not Tasmania.
Telstra, I'm sorry. How can you do that when, as I understand, Telstra haven't yet approved it? Well, first of all...
If I could just clarify one point for Mr Quigley.
Mr Quigley...
No, one of it goes to the question.
How can he prepare his business case when those two preconditions clearly haven't been met?
No,
or have they been?
You're working off an answer that was... I accept the date you said you've received it, but that answer was written probably some time ago, and the government have made a number of key decisions, which we've said publicly, we've discussed here earlier, which Mr Quigley has incorporated in his study. So the fact that you have a piece of paper that may have been written 1 month ago, 2 months ago or 3 months ago doesn't in any way cut across Mr Quigley's capacity to produce his business report.
Well, that begs the question, if this piece of paper is 2 or 3 months old, Minister, why does it only come to this committee today? I mean, we've had examples of this arrogance all the way through estimates. Can you indicate why this was only delivered to the Minister today? To the committee today, I'm sorry? I
can take that on notice and look into that for you.
Well, Mr Quigley, can you tell me when you prepared these answers? That'll clarify the issue.
I think we had a number of questions and then some supplementary questions that came later, and I think the date in which we submitted them all was the... That's the... That's the... Okay. So... When was it? 26th of July. So I think there was questions.
I think there's been an election. I think there's been an election in between Senator McDonald.
So the 26th of July is the... 27th of July. And
then there's been an election.
The committee
took
has
place.
Got these today. So, Mr Quigley, do you still say that your business case is close to presentation? And do I assume from that those two preconditions have been met?
The preconditions of the definitive agreements with Telstra being finalised, obviously not.
No. The government advised, the government told you to delay your submission of a business case and corporate plan until two things had happened. So, have those two things happened? Do you want me to repeat again what the two things were?
We've had instructions from the government that now is an appropriate time to submit the business case.
So sometime in the 2 or 3 months since this answer was written, the government's done a 180 degree on its expectations here, that it now wants the business case before it's considered and completed its consideration of the implementation study and before the deal with Telstra has been finalised, whereas apparently when this answer was written 2 or 3 months ago or whenever, Minister, the government was saying we want those two things done
half
before
of what
we get
you
a
said,
business case.
half of what you said I think might be right and half is definitely wrong.
So let me clarify. In terms of the implementation study, we want the business case from the NBN board at this point in time so the government can complete its consideration of the implementation study, as I said earlier. In other words, NBN Co is doing a design for the architecture of the system and is going to have to make certain assumptions to do that, and given where we are right now, we're in October, they've got a commitment to obviously start a rollout sometime next year. They have to have a business case approved. We've got a bunch of recommendations from McKinsey which need to be further considered by the government. We need their business case. We'll put the business case and the implementation study recommendations together and we'll get an outcome from that process with the government. So in terms of that part now is, as Mr Quigley said, an appropriate time to put forward the business case so we can get the resolution of those two things. In terms of the arrangements with Telstra, the arrangements with Telstra are a non-binding heads of agreement, but there is content within that non-binding heads of agreement which enables NBN Co to proceed to frame a business case on the assumption that that non-binding heads of agreement will become a completed heads of agreement.
I'm not sure what you're answering, Mr Harris.
I'm actually explaining that
I
Senator
just
Birmingham...
want one final question from my 5 minutes, please.
You've had 10.
And that is, if these questions on notice were supplied on the 26th of July, why is it that the department has not followed the convention of caretaker mode and dealt with these as the minister would and released them on the 26th of July or shortly thereafter when they came to the department?
Because the presumption in your question is inaccurate, Senator. You asked NBN when did they submit the response, and I gave you the date when they submitted the response, which is effectively the date they gave it to us in order to give to the minister. We sent it to the minister. It was during the election campaign and it was not progressed.
Why was it sent to the minister in the caretaker period? Why didn't you deal with it as is normal in these periods?
No.
Or was it a bit sensitive for the government in the election campaign?
All of the answers to questions on notice get submitted to the minister's office in caretaker. There isn't a problem with ministers providing those answers during caretaker period. As far as we're concerned, there isn't a problem. They can progress them. But if they choose not to progress them because they have other matters that they're considering...
Because they worried about the electoral implications of the Tasmanians being made fully aware of why they were getting a cheap service. And that is because the NBN Co was giving away its $43 billion investment in the time of the investment.
You're not giving yourself credit. You were shouting that into the microphones in May.
Senator Conroy, Senator Fisher has got the call.
Sorry.
Can the department confirm, or the minister confirm, that following the government's advice, the Governor-General has signed a disallowable instrument which would lead to the NBN being exempt from the scrutiny of the Public Works Committee, which normally oversees all public works in excess of $15 million?
I think we can.
But it's not the first one.
So the Governor-General has exempted.
I just want to give you full information. It's the second time.
That's not my question, Minister.
There's been a couple of other exemptions prior to this.
I'm asking about this one.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying, I'm making clear that none of the work of the NBN has gone through that committee.
Understood. In respect of this exemption, and in respect of previous exemptions, were the previous exemptions sought and obtained through the House of Representatives or directly to the Governor-General, bearing in mind there are the two different grounds for exemption? Two different courses, should I say?
Marianne Cullen, First Assistant Secretary, Department of Broadband Communications and the Digital Economy. Senator, the two previous exemptions were motions of urgency moved by the former Minister for Finance and Deregulation on the grounds of expediency and the urgent nature of works that needed to be carried out.
But they were motions debated in the House of Representatives, were they, Ms Cullen?
Yep, that's right. This
subject to parliamentary scrutiny.
Well, this particular exemption is allowed under the PwC Act, Section 6A(3), which allows where the Governor-General is satisfied that an authority of the Commonwealth is engaging in trading or other activities or is providing services in competition with another body or other bodies or with persons, the Governor-General may make a regulation declaring that this Act does not apply to that authority.
And that's and that is a disallowable instrument, and that was tabled in the Parliament, I understand, on the first sitting day.
Yeah, the 28th of September.
Yeah.
So that route is direct to the Governor-General. She signs off on the exemption without the scrutiny of a debate in the House of Reps.
But then once the regulation is made, it sits before the two houses of Parliament.
Yes, it does.
Yes.
Now, why is the reason for which exemption is sought this time, i.e. alleged competition with the private sector, different from the previous occasions upon which exemption was sought?
Well, the two previous occasions were in relation to urgency motions.
They were the grounds argued,
yes.
But was it not also the case that it was about an organisation competing in the same terms in which it's alleged in the regulation signed off by the Governor-General? What's changed?
I guess so.
Yet the government has decided to take a different route on this occasion.
The
One
government
that circumvents
had
parliamentary
previously,
debate,
the government had
in the
previously
short term.
foreshadowed in the exposure drafts of the National Broadband Network Companies Bill that it intended to exempt NBN Co from PwC oversight. And I guess there was a decision that was made in relation to progressing that matter because of the previous urgency motions to actually allow to use the provisions under the Act, rather than waiting for the passage of the National Broadband Network Companies Bill.
Yeah, but there is no material change in circumstance that would seem to underpin the material change in the grounds for argument for seeking an exemption in any between the first two occasions and this last occasion.
No.
An interesting happenstance. If the Governor-General's instrument were to be disallowed, which is within the province of the Senate, given time, and the Public Works Committee were permitted to scrutinise the NBN, the project, what effect would that have on the project schedule, given that I understand urgency is not the grounds being argued on this occasion, but what effect would that have on the NBN's project schedule given that the Public Works Committee can complete its...
Probably not a matter the department could comment on, Senator.
Job in 4 to 12 weeks.
We probably couldn't comment on the impact to the extent...
Every step of the way, you have sought to delay and frustrate the build of the NBN. And you're engaged,
is that why you ran straight to the Governor-General for exemption instead of debating this in the House?
And you are engaged in exactly the same process now. It's transparent to the Australian public. You'll do anything you can to sabotage the rollout
this isn't the
of the
answer
National
to a question.
Broadband Network.
This is a ramble by the Minister.
You are completely transparent. You are not interested
Come on,
in
Mr Chairman, this isn't an answer to a question.
Scrutiny.
Senator Conroy, Senator Fisher, last question.
Thank you for that non-answer, Minister. I'll now thank you. That's all I have for the moment.
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, do you sign off on your own estimates answers? Questions on notice?
I'm just trying to think whether I do them all. Are you talking about one particularly?
Well, yes. Question on notice number 146, to which Senator McDonald was referring previously.
As I said, tragically, he's completely misunderstood it.
Oh, could you just
please go on?
This is an answer from the department to a question. Is this signed off by you?
Do I look at them all before they're passed on? By and large.
By and large.
By and large, there can be a whole range of them. So my office may come to me and say we've looked at them, and then I will look through them.
Okay. Who takes responsibility for the accuracy of answers to questions?
I take responsibility. Let me be very clear about this. I take responsibility.
6:19 p.m. on Friday to Senator McDonald and other members of the committee, or at whatever time it was transmitted from your office to the Secretariat, presumably in the day or two prior to that.
Would you like to read it out again?
The government has advised NBN Co to delay its submission of its business case and corporate plan until the government has.
It was
you
accurate.
asked me to read it out.
Yeah, no. It was read out earlier. I just wanted to make sure it was the same one. It was accurate when it was written.
You signed off on it
Well,
3 days ago.
Sorry.
It was accurate when it was written.
I'm interested in when it was given to the committee secretariat.
No, it was accurate when the question was answered.
Well, there's no date on this.
The world has moved on since then.
Right, so it's okay for you to give inaccurate information.
No, you were given an answer.
Is it inaccurate now?
It was.
Is it inaccurate now?
Look,
is it inaccurate now?
You were given.
Is it inaccurate now?
I said it was accurate at the time.
Is it inaccurate today?
It was accurate at the time it was written.
Is it inaccurate
It
today?
accurately answered the question.
Is it inaccurate today, Minister?
It was accurate when it was written.
Noted. Is it inaccurate today?
It was accurate when it was written, and circumstances and the world has moved on.
I understand it was
So
accurate
it may
at the time.
It may be
Mr. Harris
outdated.
or whoever wrote it.
It may now be outdated, and other events may have overtaken it, but it was accurate when it was written.
The statement is inaccurate today.
No, I said events may have moved on.
Well, events moved on before it ever moved here, it would seem, Minister.
Yes, that's entirely possible.
So that
You are
makes
correct.
it pretty bloody useless to us, doesn't it?
When did you sign off on it?
Well, as I said, they were supplied the other day.
So you signed an inaccurate answer and gave it to this committee.
No, I repeat, it was a completely accurate answer. It is a completely accurate answer to the question that was asked. Events have subsequently moved
perhaps you'd like to footnote
on.
your answers in future, saying accurate as at whatever date you're saying they're accurate at, because I don't know how we're meant to mind read as to when this answer was accurate at. When it was written,
it was
if
an
it takes
accurate
3 months to get to
It was an accurate answer to the question that was asked.
But it wasn't accurate the day you signed it.
No,
Because events have moved on by your own admission.
Events
Right.
may have moved on.
If I could help a little.
So you'll
Events
answer the
may have
question.
moved on.
Senator Birmingham, the Minister is obviously not moving from the position that he's indicated. You're now tag teaming to try and get him to change his answer. I don't think it will work. You've got 6 minutes, and my recommendation to you would be to move on and ask some other questions and see whether they are answered more appropriately to your liking.
That's understood, Chair, and I suspect the committee can discuss this answer and the handling of it by this Minister and the Department.
If your complaint is it took too long to get you, fair enough, that's your complaint. But to then,
answer.
no, I did not sign an inaccurate answer, Senator McDonald. You cannot mislead the committee like that.
You misled the committee by sending that in 2 days ago as an accurate answer.
Senator McDonald,
and you are in contempt of the
Senator McDonald, you are misleading. You are misleading this committee.
As well.
You are misleading this committee.
Senator Conroy. Senator Conroy.
Straight in bed.
Senator Conroy. Order. Senator Conroy.
Straight in bed.
Senator Birmingham, do you have other questions?
Back to a policy question. What estimate does NBN Co have of the increase in take-up rates as a result of the decision to adopt an opt-out model by the Tasmanian government? Of connection rates, to be clear. Haven't done any analysis of it. Obviously, it's assumed there will be an increase because people will have to take active steps not to connect.
We haven't in NBN Co assumed anything.
Sorry, Mr. Quigley?
We haven't assumed anything along those lines. We haven't factored or tried to even take into account possible scenario change. We don't do that until we're sure of what the outcome.
Was it a recommendation of NBN Co or NBN Tas to the Tasmanian government?
No.
So this is something the Tasmanian government decided of their own accord?
Well, actually, I thought the Tasmanian Liberal Party called for it. and Premier Bartlett responded to it. That's actually the factual timeline, and I'm sure Senator Colbeck will actually nod in agreement. It was actually called for by the Tasmanian Liberal Party, and Premier Bartlett then responded to it.
Okay, excellent. So the Tasmanian Liberal Party is setting policy for the NBN code.
I think it's an excellent policy. I think it's an excellent policy, and I welcome bipartisan support in Tasmania for this initiative.
Fantastic, excellent. So you expect then that other states will adopt that excellent policy too, Minister?
Well, I certainly have been advocating that to them for a considerable period of time.
And you're concerned by by what seem to be public sentiments out of New South Wales and Victoria?
Could you read me the Victorian minister's quotes that say they're not going to do it?
Well, can you tell me that?
No.
Can you tell me he said
I'm
that
genuine.
he is?
Seriously, I'm serious. Can you read it to me? You must
can you
have
tell
it
me
there.
that he is?
His name's John Lenders. Could you read John Lenders' quote where he says they're not doing it?
Can you tell me? Okay, what's the position of all the other states then?
No.
Have any other states agreed to do it?
You've made a claim that, well, to be fair, you've based it on the Australian again. And what you should do is you should go and read the source quote. Okay. I would invite you to go and read genuinely, Simon, go and read the source quote, and then see if you can contort the source quote into the story that was written in the Australian. And I invite you to find the New South Wales minister who equally makes the same statement.
We're asking you questions.
I'm actually offering you an opportunity
to not
climb up onto a cliff.
Fact, then, if you're going to contest that, how much equity
I'm not
capital
going to contest it. I'm saying to you, I invite you to show me the statement.
I'm happy to move on and go and seek the source quote. You can send it to me later. How much equity capital has the Commonwealth injected into NBN Co so far?
662 million.
662
million. Off the top of my head, that's the right number.
Excellent. And how much will be injected by the end of the current financial year?
There is, by the end of the current financial year, by the end of the calendar year, I think we have another 350 million of the second tranche of an equity request. After that, I'm not sure of the numbers. There's been no more requests after that.
Okay, so extra 350 mil coming by the end of the calendar year.
I believe so.
So if I could just give you some further information on your last question. Here is what the Treasurer of Victoria and Minister for ICT, John Lenders, actually said. Seriously, actually said. Our intention is for every Victorian home to be connected to the NBN, but individuals will be able to choose whether or not to sign up and use the service. Mr Lenders doesn't say he's not supporting the Tasmanian NBN approach. He actually says our intention is for every Victorian home to be connected. And that ends up being a quote as Victoria refused to support Tasmania. Okay. I repeat, you really don't want to use as your source document the Australian newspaper.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister.
And on the 16th of July, just to really round it out, the 16th of July 2010, the New South Wales Government announced, this is a press release from the relevant minister, that it had amended the state's planning system to enable fast-track delivery of telecommunications facilities, including new broadband infrastructure. Does that sound to you like they'd ruled out?
Okay, Senator Birmingham, that now concludes today's hearing. I thank the Minister and officers for their attendance. Senators are reminded that written questions on notice should be provided to the Secretariat by Friday of this week.
I like how you keep saying that, Senator.
Can I thank all senators for their cooperation, and the Minister and the departments, and thank Hansard. Thank you.
Only if you promise to try and have me cited for contempt.
What a good idea.